Japan's government just designated 17 priority sectors for long-term protected investment: AI, semiconductors, quantum technology, shipbuilding, defense. It's reminiscent of the 1980s, when Japan was said to have the world's only capitalist command economy. But here's what's different this time. The old MITI-led approach was about export-driven growth in a stable world with a rules-based international order. That world is gone. We now have declining American power and dependability, a rise of multipolar geopolitics, and a rupture in the rules-based trading order. What Japan is actually doing right now, whether its policymakers fully realize it or not, is attempting to build strategic resilience into the national economy. Not growth, not export dominance, resilience, the capacity to absorb shocks that nobody predicted, keep functioning, and adapt. And that raises a question every business leader in Japan should be asking right now. Not about government policy, about your own organization. How resilient is your strategy, really? Let's talk about the shocks that were real. Japan has been hit by compounding disruptions in rapid succession. COVID collapsed supply chains that were optimized for efficiency instead of redundancy. The US-China technology war forced companies to choose sides. The yen weakened to levels that erode purchasing power and squeeze import-dependent businesses. Interest rates are rising for the first time in a generation. None of these were predicted with precision. None of them appeared in most corporate 5-year plans, and none of them are finished. The Japanese government's response: protect strategic sectors, guarantee multi-year budget allocations, align industrial policy with national security, is an attempt to institutionalize resilience at the level of the entire economy. You can agree or disagree with the approach, but the underlying diagnosis is correct. Optimizing for efficiency in a stable world is rational. That world is gone. Now here's the assumption nobody examined. Here's the uncomfortable truth about most corporate strategy in Japan, and frankly, most strategy I encounter anywhere in the world. It's built on assumptions that nobody has ever written down. I said this in my book, Strategy on Your Own Terms, and I'll say it again here, because the current environment makes it more urgent than ever. No strategy means much without a statement of the assumptions it's based on. A strategy for a manufacturer has to be based on assumptions about supply chains, energy costs, exchange rates, competitive dynamics, the regulatory environment, and any one of those can fail. The further out the strategy extends, the more likely any given assumption is wrong. And yet, I rarely see a statement of assumptions in a strategy document. What I see instead is a justification of why the strategy is right, plus a list of tactics. That's a plan. It is not a strategy. That distinction matters enormously right now. A plan tells you what to do if everything goes as expected. A strategy tells you how to think and act when it doesn't. Japan's businesses, Japanese companies, and the Japan operations of foreign multinationals alike overwhelmingly built their strategies on an assumption of environmental stability, that supply chains would stay open, that energy would be available, that the yen would stay in a manageable range, that the rules-based trading order would hold. Those assumptions have failed, in several cases all at once. And here's the thing. The companies navigating this disruption most effectively are not necessarily the ones with the best supply chain infrastructure. They're the ones whose leaders had already asked, what if our most important assumptions turn out to be wrong? And they had prepared a contingent response. So what does a resilient strategy actually look like? Strategic resilience isn't a plan you write once. It's a practice you build into the way people in your organization think about strategy at every stage. In Strategy on Your Own Terms, I describe 4 practices that separate strategies which hold under pressure from strategies that collapse on first contact with reality. All 4 matter right now. First, red teaming. At least one internal team should regularly plot against your own business as if they were a competitor. Overenthusiasm for a strategy and a culture that demands buy-in and positive thinking will get you blindsided by threats you could have foreseen. There's no reason both Kodak and Fujifilm couldn't have seen the demise of film coming much earlier than they did. You want at least one group inside your business actively trying to bring it down before someone outside it does. Second, ongoing assumption monitoring. Strategy reviews need to reassess underlying assumptions, not just track progress against KPIs. An assumption that was correct at the outset can become wrong later. I know a Japanese chemical manufacturer that invested 9 figures in a Southeast Asian factory based on the assumption that customers wanted Japanese standard quality at a reduced cost. It turned out customers wanted good enough quality at an even lower cost. In every strategy review, the KPIs were tracking green, right up until the company actually went to market. There's an axiom here: no strategy ever survives first contact with the market. Third, making room for growth. Resilience requires the willingness to cut, not just what's failing, but what's no longer advancing the strategy, even if it's still profitable. The companies that weather disruption best are led by people who already made the hard decisions about what the business is fundamentally for and what it is not. That clarity, decided in advance, is what allows fast action when the environment forces the issue. Fourth, deliberate disruption. A business that's disrupting its own market is far harder to destabilize than one defending a static position. If you're making the future, you're a lot less vulnerable to a future you didn't make. Now let me talk about the Japan dimension specifically. In Japan, the normative pressure against naming risks and surfacing assumptions out loud is particularly strong. When a strategy is presented by a senior leader, the social cost of pointing out what might go wrong is high. So concerns stay unspoken. Rough edges get smoothed over. What comes out of the consensus process is a document that reflects the median view of what's achievable, which frankly I'd call mediocre, instead of the boldest view of what's desired, tested against the most honest assessment of what could go wrong. Explicitly naming assumptions and their risks changes that dynamic completely. It creates a legitimate space for concerns to surface, because the leader has already acknowledged that risks exist. It also makes it much harder to wave away concerns as shikata ga nai, nothing to be done, because this is Japan, when the actual question on the table is, what's our contingent response if this assumption fails? The most resilient leaders I know in Japan have made questioning assumptions a required step in the strategy process, not an act of dissent. What comes out of that is a consensus that's genuinely earned, not one that only holds until the first assumption breaks. So here's the question for your business. The Takaichi government has correctly diagnosed a national resilience problem, and it's responding at the scale available to it. As a business leader, you don't have the option of designating 17 priority sectors and exempting them from normal budget rules. What you have is your organization, your strategy, and the practices you build into how you think and decide. So here's the diagnostic question. I ask every leader whose strategy was built for a more stable world. Take the strategy currently guiding your business. Can you state the 3 or 4 assumptions it depends on? Are they written down anywhere? Who is monitoring them? And what's your contingent response if the most important one turns out to be wrong tomorrow? If you can't answer those questions, you don't have a resilient strategy. You have a plan that assumed the world would cooperate. The world is not cooperating. That's not a reason for paralysis. It's exactly why strategy matters more than ever, and why it has to be built to hold even when things don't go as expected. I'm Stephen Blystein. If you like these kinds of provocative ideas about leadership, please subscribe. I'd love to have your voice in the conversation. And if you're interested in a deeper dive, my book Strategy on Your Own Terms is available on Amazon. The link is in the description. See you in the next video.